Do you have any practical tips for how to take more space?
In life?
On stage.
A few weeks ago, I got together for 4 days with Rosie to create some new handpan music together. We learned so much from each other during that time, had a really, really great time. And one of the things that came out of it was this conversation about space, about the importance of space in music.
I think, you know, this isn't necessarily a positive thing, but I think the way that I play and the space that I play with, the fact that a lot of my playing has a lot of emptiness and a lot of silence, comes from the fact that growing up I was afraid to take up so much space when jamming with other people, because I wasn't, and actually, I'll be perfectly honest, it's still the case this week. Like when you kind of jump in and take that space and fill in, I'm like, oh right, okay, Rosie really knows what she's doing. I'm gonna let her do that.
No.
And that's totally what's happening. It's just that kind of, and that's not necessarily because I think I'm bad or anything like that, but it definitely comes from that seed that's still with me.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, but I think that it also a positive spin on that is that it allows that sensitivity in my playing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think having that level of trust is really important as well. To be able to trust that the other person can fill in those spaces if necessary while you're not doing that, or hold you while you're allowing that space.
Yeah, like we kind of think as like the soloist, say in a duet or a jam, one person's holding down the groove and the other person's taking a solo. Our attention's always on the person doing the solo. But actually, if the person holding down the groove, you know, messes up the tempo or plays the wrong chord or whatever, they're the one that's stitching up the other person.
Right.
And really, it's just as much of a responsibility to be the one that's grooving, because you're supporting your partner. You're letting them feel held and safe and letting them do their thing.
Yeah.
And just stepping back and taking a breath and allowing that space, because I think it's the same thing in conversation. Like I talk a lot. I talk a lot. Like I'm scared of silence, and if there's a quiet time, I'm like, oh, that reminds me of something I saw last week on the telly. You know, because it's just like, and I think until we get really comfortable with each other, people want to feel that silence.
Yeah.
And our instinct is to jump in, whereas it's like sometimes there can be a time when no one plays. And that would also be okay, but it's something about finding the stillness in yourself and finding the calmness, because doing that silence on stage is scary.
It's hard. Both kind of emotionally and technically. Like, and I have, you know, when you've got those long pauses and long silences, it's so easy to rush back in with your next part, right? And if you're on stage with a bunch of people and everybody's rushing into the next part, it's just like a cacophony of like, blah. And so having that trust to really sit back into it and be like, okay, here's the space, here's the space, here's the space. Now we go.
Yes.
There's a real skill in that.
And it's so satisfying when it's good.
Oh, yeah.
Like something I'm often saying, I work with young people, getting them to present. They'll come up on the stage, as soon as they're stood, they'll speak. As soon as they finish speaking, they'll leave. And to say, you know, we're all watching, we're ready, sit down, stand there, you know, take a moment, take a deep breath, and then speak, because a second on stage feels like an hour to you, doesn't it? Like, your heart's going, because your heart rate's up, everything is sweating.
I think breathing is probably the first and most foundational, fundamental element that is really great. And I think having, like, away from music, having that space to allow yourself to be quiet and silent and to have some breathing exercises or breathing space can be really, really useful. I think, and I really hate to say it, on like a musical level and practical level, metronome practice.
Metronome practice.
I don't do it enough.
Neither do I.
Metronome practice.
Metronome practice.
But when I say metronome practice, I don't mean like cranking up the metronome and seeing how fast you can play.
No.
I mean cranking down the metronome so that there's loads of space between each tick, each beat, and seeing if you can still match to it, and seeing how uncomfortably slow you can play, because I think that's in many ways way harder.
And a really fun thing about the metronome, is you don't even have to be at your pan. You can do it on the way to work, you can do it anywhere. Often, if I'm walking around, I've got a metronome in my ears. I do sometimes, every now and then. And it just means that you can click to it, or, I mean, don't try and walk at 40 beats a minute, it'll take you forever to get anywhere. But it's just, 10 minutes a day of trying to clap with a metronome, or even just speaking or saying semiquavers or any kind of divisions, just gets you in the mood of it. And you can get gapless metronomes, which really help, so they leave little gaps when they come back, and there's so many different types, but yeah, getting comfortable with the space.
Yeah. And I think as well, if you don't have opportunities to jam with other people, if that's not something that's available to you, then if you can find grooves that don't have any kind of key so your handpan can match with it, whatever, like beats online or whatever, or find other handpan players online, like play their music. It's like, look for your scale on YouTube, find them playing it, and then jam along. But because they're playing on their own, they're filling up all the space. So you can just bloop, bloop, like pootle around and barely do anything. And that forces you to get into that headspace. I think that's a really, really good activity for practicing that. And it also gives you space to practice kind of soloing over the top.
Yeah. And also, just think about it. I think that's one of the things that this week I've just been thinking about it more, because we've been talking about it. And then this week, today I recorded some bits, and I was just thinking about space a lot more, because I think our brain is like, what can I do next? What am I going to do? Everything's moving. And then just thinking like, oh, and then the next thing. Like, that is giving yourself permission to get up on stage and play one chord and then another chord. It's great, right?
And actually, now that you say that, I think another avenue that space has come from for me is this awareness, and I learned this through taiko drumming when I studied taiko, is this concept ma, which is that t-shirt I was wearing yesterday, respect your ma.
That's funny.
It means space, silence, the space between the notes. And so I was always taught by my teachers that the space between the beats are just as important as the beats themselves, and that's what makes it music, right? If it was just beat after beat after beat, it's just noise, it's just sound. But it's the space in between and the differences in the space between. So whenever I teach groove, when I'm teaching people how to create their own grooves or rhythms or whatever, or melodies, I say, think about how the space between are either similar, the same, or different, and how you can make that interesting every time by changing up how wide that space is. And it's the same in terms of jamming or on a wider level, like a composing level. It is that space between that actually makes it interesting, rather than just the same da 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 all the way through.
So true.
And the space is music, essentially.
Space is music.
Whoa. Do we need that on a t-shirt?
Yes!
Thanks for chatting with me.
Thanks for having me.
This has been really nice. Thanks for listening to us ramble along. If you want to check out Rosie's channel, or more of what Rosie makes, or more of what we've been doing together, then follow the links in the description. She's ace. So do that.